So this is the longest and most complicated, I would say, storyline. Hello. That I've ever done in one of my games. You know, in the notes it says we started this in January of 2022, and we were still dealing with it all the way into May. So that's like 4 months of real lifetime that we were interacting with the story. Not continuously, it was drip fed through many different subplots, and it took a long time for the players to kind of drag it all together. So the recounting of it will probably be a little chaotic. Also a little confusing since, because it took so long, I would often tell the players things or answer questions, especially involving dates.
Bad dates.
And then would forget when 4 weeks later they'd be like, oh, what year was it that this house was built? And I'm like, I don't fucking remember. But yeah, this is the story of the Morningside cult.
Excuse me, are y'all with the cult?
We're not a cult. We're an organization that promotes love and...
Yeah, this is it.
I'm going to start by describing this mansion that the players lived in for the vast majority of the game. When the players first arrived in Portland, the player characters first arrived in Portland, right away, Co, who's rich, says, we need a house. And Eleanor, the harpy, tells them, oh, there's a really nice, really big house that's on the market for a great deal. She takes them and shows them the house, and Co is just like, I love it, I buy it.
Do you like the house? Did it impress you?
Nothing has impressed me for over 6,000 years.
Okay, Zev?
I love it. We'll buy it.
Really? Just like that?
Sure.
And this is where they live for the remainder of the campaign, in this giant mansion. And this is also where they encounter the Morningside cult, because the house ends up being intrinsically connected to the cult itself. The cult was largely operational within this house for a long time, and a lot of their plans revolve around this house. So in the house they have, like, in the many different rooms, they have this tower that kind of looks like a bell tower or a clock tower, and Ko sets himself up in this tower because he has his own cult who live in this tower and hang around watching him sleep all day, which is apparently what they do. It's a big part of their morning affirmations. Gideon sets up a giant workout space, which is basically like a gym with just a bunch of exercise equipment like a cot to sleep on. They've got Adrian, the NPC, who starts living there with them, who like drags a couch out into a room and sets up a TV, just sits there playing Switch all night. Stas like digs out a tunnel down into the sewers and fills it with traps that like suck the oxygen out of the room, and has like his computers and stuff down there. And Emil is just basically sleeping in the garage. And Emil sleeping in the garage is where they first start to notice that something is weird about this house, because after they haven't been there that long, Emil wakes up and finds that someone or something has left him a note. And the note has a list of, various doodads, trinkets, gimmicky things, Twinkie ingredients, and also a few body parts. Just a few human body parts. Nothing serious. And, a quarter. Emil looks at this and he's like, oh, a quarter, 25 cents. You have my attention. I mean, I'm not evil. I would never go out and just like steal people's teeth or eyeballs. But if you're going to pay me as much as a quarter, then we can talk, obviously. He keeps finding the things that these notes ask him for and delivering them, putting them under his pillow, until eventually someone or something leaves him like a little pirate chest full of gold, which Emil is just delighted by. Now Stas sets up cameras to watch for what's going on, and they find that during the day, some invisible creature that doesn't register on the cameras drags a chest of pirate gold up and leaves it at Emil's bed, and like steals the stuff from underneath the the pillow. At which point everyone else is like, okay, this seems like a horrible problem, although Emil thinks it's just awesome. They start to see ghosts. They eventually convince Walter Bell, the mortician, who is also a Giovanni, forgot what they were called for a sec, to come to their house and look around, and Walter Bell walks in and is like, woo!
What was that? What was that?
What was what?
Did you hear that?
Your house is super haunted. You were aware of that? And they're like, no, yeah, well, kind of. There's also probably fairies in here? And Walter's like, well, I don't know about that, but you should probably leave. So they start researching the history of this house, and they find out that sometime in the late 80s or early 90s, depending on which week they asked me the date,
Bad dates.
there was this weird cult that used to reside here. They're a little unclear on the details of the cult. Some weird, like, prepper cult, who apparently kidnapped some children, and then the FBI raided the place, and seemingly the members of the cult all got killed in this FBI raid. Over the course of time, wandering around, like, auspexing things and spirits touching things and ghost visioning things, they see various weird things. They see groups of children dressed up in, like, white dresses and garlands in their hair, like something out of fucking Midsummer, dancing around. They see SWAT guys running around shooting at people or sitting on the steps crying. They see guys in, like, Ku Klux Klan looking hoods running about with shotguns and stuff. Increasingly strange things. And then they start to see even weirder stuff, a bunch of messages left on the walls in blood. The messages are all written in French, and they have to translate these to figure out what they say. But they say a few interesting things. One of them says, there was a hole here, but now it's gone, which of course is from Silent Hill. They also see a message that says, you were sick, but now you're well, and there is work to do, which is a quote from Timequake by Kurt Vonnegut. Another thing that they hear ghosts saying and see written on the walls is, the wheel, it turns, it goes around, it makes an ancient rumbling sound, which is from Lex.
The wheel it turns, it comes around. It makes an ancient rumbling sound.
There are certain things that you hear, like, in your life, you just hear them from wherever, and you're like, that's creepy. That just context free, that just is just a little creepy. And you hold on to those things, you remember them, until years later, you're running a tabletop game, and someone's like, what does the ghost say? And you're just like, it says this creepy thing. And, you pull them from wherever. They might be from Silent Hill, they might be from Kurt Vonnegut, they might be from Lex. Most of them are probably going to end up being from Lex. There's so much shit that I pull into my games from Lex. Years ago, I ran an entire D&D adventure that was just based on the King of the Fairies episode of Lex, where they all get turned into trees.
Kai, 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 we must get away from here. If we don't, we will be stuck for 1,000 years.
Join us in our song. After all, 1,000 years isn't very long.
Another thing that they run into is they keep seeing this recurring vision of the Tooth Fairy monsters from the movie. Is it called Tooth Fairies? No, it's the Guillermo del Toro movie. It's called Something in the Dark. It has Katie Holmes' Tooth Fairy movie. I can't remember what it's called right now. They see this, like, invisible, like, Tooth Fairy creature crawling over the head of this guy, tear into his mouth and rip his teeth out. And they also keep running into this ghost, this recurring image ghost of a SWAT guy throwing something and then screaming like, you fool, which they were perplexed by. But if by any chance anyone who listens to this is like an elder millennial who grew up in the early days of YouTube, you might get that joke.
Now, you're gonna open the door, throw the fucking flashbang in the room. Ah, you fool! Why did you throw it into the door? It bounced right back in your fucking face. I can't help you now.
They figure out that there was this guy named Morningside who built this house like 100 years ago. And they also figure out that the house is seemingly a fetter. Like, the house itself is some sort of a fetter for ghosts. There are a lot of ghosts trapped here. The grounds to this place are surrounded. There's like this ring of metal that has been buried like 6 feet down that goes in a huge circle around the entire grounds of this mansion. And every 20 feet, there is a cage, like a human-sized cage, submerged in the earth. And inside every one of those human-sized cages is a human skeleton. I'll just go ahead and say what that was because they never figured it out. The cult was being actively attacked by werewolves throughout a lot of its history because the werewolves, who live all over Portland, knew what the cult was doing and were trying to wipe them out. And so the cult used their magic to devise basically a gigantic werewolf ward. And the way that they built it was by capturing a bunch of humans who were kinfolk, meaning that they're like cousins of werewolves. They have werewolf blood in them. Murdering them, putting them in these cages, and submerging them in the earth to create this barrier so that werewolves could not enter and could not attack the house. Meaning that, ironically, throughout all of their battles with werewolves, the players were in this completely werewolf-proof mansion, but they never realized that it was werewolf-proof. I don't think they ever figured out that that's what it specifically did. It was pretty funny. While all this is going on, and they're dealing with other things, there's a recurring side quest that is mentioned 2 or 3 times to the players, which is there's a cult of hippies out in the forest who are doing weird shit that you should maybe go look into. But the players just never bother. Something that I do a lot is I will give the players a small task, and if they never choose to go deal with it themselves, I will either have an NPC go and do it, and then the NPC always does like a worse job of it than you would, right? Which is an idea I got from Pathologic. Or no one goes to deal with it, and the problem just gets bigger and bigger and worse until eventually the players are forced to deal with it. And after several weeks of just never feeling like the creepy hippie cult in the woods was worth investigating, that eventually got a little bit more serious, and the players hear from a kindred, I believe. I think it was Lewis the Thin Blood who told them about a weird YouTube video that he had stumbled across that was going virals on the interwebs, which shows this guy who's like one of those, outdoorsy YouTube people who goes around and explores. And he finds this weird cave, this very creepy fucking cave in the woods, not very far from Portland, and then disappears into this cave. And it's like one of those ghost hunter guy walks into a spooky cave. Oh, is there a spooky ghost in here?
What was that? What was that?
And like it seems kind of fake, but also a little creepy. And the players are like, okay. Let's just real quick hop in the car, drive out to Mount Hood National Forest, take a quick hike to wherever this guy was, check the cave, come back, in and out, 2-hour adventure, right? They're able to go out to where he was, and they locate his car, and there's no sign of him. At which point then they're like, see, we were figuring it was fake probably, but if his car is still here, that means he's probably dead. So let's go see if like a werewolf ate him or something. So they go looking for this cave, and they actually, as I recall, got lost in the woods for like an entire night, and ultimately had to dig a hole and like hide because they just got so fucking lost out in the woods. They couldn't find the cave, they couldn't find the road, they couldn't find the dead YouTuber's car, they couldn't find their car. They sleep through the day, they wake up again, they look around, and finally they find this weird cave. As soon as they approach the cave, there's this weird like pain that they experience, and they're like, oh fuck, like this definitely feels like it's warded, like a Tremere ward, like we can't enter it without it hurting us. Emil manages to force his way in there by possessing an owl. Inside there is a bunch of weird mechanical stuff, like what looks like, best guess is it looks like a bunch of radio equipment or batteries or something. Eventually Gideon is like, you know what, I'm just gonna like walk in there, I don't care how bad it hurts. And Gideon just like strong man's in there, takes a bunch of damage, grabs this radio, which is a ham radio, and starts walking out. And starts being chased by these like ghost apparition monsters that like manifest out of the walls to defend the cave, which are these like big chicken-footed Baba Yaga double-headed baby monsters. And if that doesn't make any sense to you, they're the creatures from Silent Hill: The Room.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Which is who they're dealing with. I don't know that the players ever put it together. I don't think very many of my players have ever played Silent Hill, but the cult that they're dealing with here is specifically based on the cult from Silent Hill.
Was that also part of trying to resurrect God?
It's not uncommon for people to worship the same God and still disagree.
They have a fight with these things, which is a pretty rough fight. They get hurt quite a bit. They do manage to, I think, destroy them. Or at least, I can't remember if they destroyed them or just escaped, just got out of their range. But they get away. And they start messing around with this radio, trying to figure out what the radio does. And the radio is set to a specific channel. So for a while, they try listening to this channel. Nothing happens. They try sending messages like from the radio on this channel. Like saying, like, hello, is there anybody hiding there in the dark? But they don't get any response. Until at 3 p.m. during the day, when the players are all asleep and they have their ghouls sitting listening to the radio, which, you know, that's got to be fun when your master's like, hey, Steve, whatever, chop, chop, this is what you're doing today. I want you to sit by this radio and listen to it. All we hear is white noise. I want you to listen to it every second of the day, all day, until I wake up. 12 straight hours, no bathroom breaks. But their ghouls do hear messages, and they do record them / write them down. They are in French, and so the players have to translate them again. But what they say is, perfect. Thursday, the 3 twins at the sacred hour. He wounds my heart with the sound of 7 cherries. You will be well, and there will be some work to do. Thursday, the 3 twins at the sacred hour. The chairs are against the wall. The knights are on their horses. You will be well, and there will be some work to do. They translate this, they read it, and they're like, yeah, definitely. We don't know what the fuck that means. They are kind of like lost as to what to do, and so they just fall back on spirits touching everything. There comes a point in every vampire campaign where somebody gets enough levels of Auspex to take spirits touch, and then their solution to every problem is like, look, let me just try spirits touching everything in this room and just see if I notice anything. Most of the stuff is just like weird, culty stuff. Just weird spookiness. Nothing that seems particularly helpful. But they do find one thing that is interesting to them, which is they find the word albigens written on one of these objects when they spirits touch it. This is when they start doing more like library time, like any good Call of Cthulhu game. They go to the books. That's like in those old horror movies, you know, where they have to go to the library at night, and they got the little green lamp, and they got the microfiche machine. They're like cycling, and like these newspaper clippings popping up from 50 years ago, like, oh my God, according to the Boston Globe, I'm dead. And looking that up, they find out that this is connected to a religious order, the Cathars, from France.
Your mother was a hamster, and your father smelt of elderberry.
Catharism, and I'm just pulling this off of having written a paper about them years ago in college and read the Wikipedia article more recently when I was running the game. The gist of it is, the Catharists came to they were a group of Catholics in France in the Middle Ages who came to the conclusion that life is pretty shit, isn't it? Like, you look around, as George Carlin would say, the longer you live, the more you look around, the more you start to realize something is fucked up. Everything seems terrible. Doesn't really make sense that God would create this world for us. So this must actually be hell. We're trapped in hell. The world around us is hell. Kind of a reasonable assumption to leap to, I have to say. Therefore, the only reason that we're here is because the devil...
God? Are you sure you don't mean devil?
Whichever you like.
You know, the guy from Final Fantasy VIII, he is tricking us and holding us here, trying to trick us for some Catholic reason. I'm not Catholic. I don't know how it works. So they're like, we got to do something different. Reject Catholicism. Reject the devil. avoid the temptation of the devil so that we can die to graduate out of hell and then escape back to the real world, which obviously the real world would be better than this shit show, right? I think it's a perfectly reasonable explanation for why everything is so shitty. The Catholics themselves didn't care for it, and they brutally genocided the Catharians out of existence. But some of these Catharists escaped, not in real life. I mean, maybe some did in real life. I don't know, probably. But some of them in the nonsense world of the game escaped to Oregon.
There's a place where that idea still exists as a reality, and I've been there.
Where is it?
Portland.
Oregon?
Yeah.
Now, obviously not immediately. They would have gone somewhere else first. There were not a lot of Frenchmen in Oregon in the 1400s, but eventually they ended up in Oregon. So they started investigating this church, Wish House. This Wish House church separates into two different organizations. So you have the Halo Church, which is running like an orphanage over there on the west side of Portland. And further over on the further east side of Portland, you have this new version of the same church, which calls itself the Church of the Assumption, which is still operating out of this house that they purchased back from the university that previously bought it from them. The Church of the Assumption are the ones who eventually get caught kidnapping children and are gunned down by the FBI in the big fight that the players have seen many aftermath images of. The Halo organization, though, still operated that orphanage for decades, and from what the players are able to glean from the newspaper clippings, a lot of orphans seem to have vanished there, but I'm sure nothing bad happened to them. So at this point, the players are like, you know who we should go ask about this? The mayor. Like the old prince. He was the prince of the city for 100 years, and he's still alive. He's retired. And he tells them that this cult, the Morningside cult, was a problem for them for years, although it didn't really interact with the vampires as much as the werewolves were always fighting with them. Mostly the vampires stayed out of it, but eventually, he says sometime in the 80s, they found out that these guys were trying to summon a demon, and he was like, well, that was no good. So the Tremere contacted this group of, I think they're called the Josians, which is like a group of the Tremere who were demon hunters, who came in shortly after the SWAT raid and exterminated whatever cultists they could find, destroyed all their stuff. As far as he was aware, that was the end of it. He was under the impression that was the end of the Morningside cult. Okay, so going over this again, I realized that I somehow forgot to ever mention what the actual objective of the cult was specifically. The objective of this cult is to open a rift between what they consider to be hell, which is our world, and what they consider to be the real world, which is the world of demons, and summon their god, the creator of the universe, back so that it can recreate the world, remove them from hell, and then they will be living in the real world again. Now, this would probably bring about the apocalypse and end the world. Whether that would be an improvement on aggregate is debatable, but that is basically their intention. And doing this requires a large number of human sacrifices and a bunch of black magic, but it has to be specific kinds of people that they sacrifice, people who are perfect. And in order to create these perfect people, they have to raise them from the time that they are children, and they also have to imbue them with many levels of sacrifices. So it's like a pyramid scheme where you have to sacrifice like 20 perfect believers to create one perfect believer, and then you have to sacrifice 20 of those perfect believers to make like the rank 2 perfect believer, and you go up the scale a few times until you get the super special scion ultimate believer times 3, and then that's the guy who you can sacrifice to finally hit the history eraser button and basically reboot reality.
Have you tried turning it off and on again?
The players kind of 50-50 figure out the like code that's being spoken over the radio with like a sacred hour and stuff, and they're like pretty sure that the location that's being mentioned is the cave. So they're like, okay, we think that someone is meeting someone at that cave, so let's go down there and try and find them. Sure enough, they did interpret it correctly, and they do encounter a bunch of these cultists who show up to do a ritual at this cave. Now they get into a fight with these cultists, and most of the cultists are just regular humans, which for the vampires is easy. You just like knock them over. But a couple of them are like really strong, like supernaturally strong. And one of them is like a wizard with a magic skull, and he's got like a goblet of smoky wine. He's like casting spells at him. They end up killing, I think, all the cultists except the wizard guy who teleports away. They were dragging in all these children to sacrifice, and the players save at least some of the children. But they're still not entirely sure what was going on. Through spirits touching the bodies of these like super powerful cultists, they're able to see this ritual that was performed on them at some time in the indeterminate past, where they drank this like potion that caused their bodies to start like emaciating and decaying and caused them to go through this like really violent, painful death. And then as they die, their bodies split open like a cocoon, and a new baby version of themselves, like a Benjamin Button version of themselves, pops out. Like a giant baby with Schwarzenegger muscles. And, you know, no hair. Like throwing out any ideas they can to try and figure out where these cultists are. And eventually they managed to find them by, of all things, running their license plate. They got to look at their license plate on their van when they were fighting them. Sorry, they captured the van because they killed them and stole their truck. But they run this license plate through a sheriff. There's not a vampire sheriff. There's a ghoul that Paul had created, who was like a local sheriff of a small town just outside of Portland. And they get this little sheriff guy to run the license plate, and it pops back with an address. So they're like, well, let's just go to this address and see if maybe the cultists actually live there. Like maybe it really is their truck. And so they show up. Kind of was like feeling like they don't really have any other ideas. But it is the cultist's house, or the house of one of the cultists, and they show up there as the cultists, this wizard guy and the others, are in the midst of summoning a demon. There's this big like dog monster that they create to try and attack the players, which isn't especially dangerous, although it does have like a proboscis that it stabs. I think it was Stas. It stabs Stas with it and like injects demon beetles into him. At which point I think Stas either chopped his own arm off or like flayed his arm. I can't remember which. Just like, I've seen the mummy. No. Now, unfortunately, while the players are away doing this and investigating a couple of other leads, the cultists go back to the only place that the cultists have been trying to get to the whole time, which is the player's house. As I mentioned at the beginning, the player's house is integral to this. The player's house is the focal point of this summoning ritual, which the cultists have been working on for, decades. And they have not managed to pull it off yet, but despite being knocked down multiple times by the FBI and the werewolves and the Tremere, they have once again gotten to the point where they are ready to try their big move to summon God.
We are transmitting from year 1999. You are receiving this broadcast in order to alter the events you are seeing.
They think, because they think that the world is hell, and make the world a better place. The players, conveniently, almost as if there was someone controlling these things, the players conveniently show up in the middle of this ritual to discover that their ghouls have all been mind-controlled, their house is turning into jelly, and something wicked is this way approaching. Now, during this fight, the sorcerer guy, who is a descendant of Jebediah Morningside, returns to life the original Jebediah Morningside, summons him back from the dead temporarily so that he can complete the ritual, which he almost does, but the players are tearing through these cultists pretty fast, so they manage to kind of fuck up the ritual. It only creates kind of like a baby demon, which is a big, gibbering, wiggly mass of flesh, which the players quickly took to calling the Gibbering Wiggler.
Come on, y'all! Commence the juggling!
Yeah, swing your partner around and round.
After considerable effort, they managed to kill this gibbering wiggler and kill Jebediah Morningside, the ghost of Jebediah, the zombie ghost, whatever, of Jebediah Morningside, which ends the ritual and puts a final stop, as far as they're aware, to this cult. And the players finally are able to say what they've been wanting to say ever since they first found out that their house was haunted.
This house is clean.
And that is the end of the story of the Morningside cult. Except for they do run into a guy from the Morningside cult later, but that's a slightly different story. But that is, as far as they know, at least for the time being, the end of the Morningside cult. A huge story. It took a long time for the players to get through. In between all of these things, of course, they were doing so many other things. And so it was all very confusing for them. It took them a long time to even realize that all this stuff they were running into was connected. And then once they did, it took them a long time to put it all together. But it ended up being a very cool and memorable story, I think. They let me pull in a lot of fun stuff from Phantasm and Poltergeist and Silent Hill, of course. So, yeah, all in all, I think it was a success. So that is the end of the story. That's all I've got. But, remember, you were sick, but now you're well. And there's work to do.
Race unto the forest king and Titania. Oh, oh, overrun, all the bells will ring. Stanley Tweedle shall be wed
Stanley
to the
Tweedle
forest
shall be
king.
wed to the forest king.
Overrun, all the bells will ring.
Stanley
Stanley Tweedle shall be wed to
Stanley
the
Tweedle
forest
shall be
king.
wed to the forest king.